About Julian Assange as a house guest. Now we're going to move on to torture. Our next question is from Trevor Roby.
Thank you, Tony. The use of torture is anathema to a civilised society. We decry the Spanish Inquisition, yet tacitly accept or ignore the use of torture, both physical and psychological, in many of our closest trading partners. Do the panellists follow the rule that the ends justify the means?
Greg Sheridan.
Well, no, I'm against torture under any circumstances, but I think Glenn's book makes a helpful case because it says torture doesn't work, it doesn't get you good information. But I tell you this, I do think you confront a much more disturbing, difficult, interesting moral dilemma when you construct a case where torture does work and might save many innocent lives. Now, I don't think that justifies out-and-out torture, but I don't think it's absolutely black and white. I don't think you're obliged to give the Taliban that you capture on the battlefield a slice of apple pie and a cup of tea and a warm environment. I think you are allowed to be pretty robust in your questioning, and the moral dilemma comes about when you think this person has information which may well save innocent lives if he gives it to us. Now, Jeffrey argues
Can I ask, what is the limitation you put on this? Because we know that American Republicans at very senior levels talk about enhanced interrogation techniques, and there's a whole set of things you can and can't do to people.
Well, I think, there have got to be rules, and the CIA, as I understand it, asked for proper legal guidance all the time and found it very difficult to get legal guidance. There have got to be rules.
But they ended up doing a lot of waterboarding, for example. So just to sort of test you here, do you think waterboarding is legitimate?
Well, I would say this. Although I have the greatest respect for our fellow panellists, there are other authors with similar knowledge who argue that enhanced interrogation techniques did provide life-saving information. Now, it seems to me...
So just to get back to my question, would you condone waterboarding?
Well, I'm getting in my crab-like way to an answer, Tony. If the technique doesn't leave any lasting physical damage whatsoever, or any lasting psychological damage, then I think you have to examine whether, in an extreme case, it might be allowed. But I wouldn't have a blanket policy saying, yes, you can waterboard, but I wouldn't absolutely rule out things which are pretty stressful in the interrogation
But if it's
atmosphere.
painful, it's torture, even if it doesn't leave a lasting mark.
Look, it's painful to go to a news conference, I can tell you what, and that leaves you a lasting mark at a newspaper.
Well,
that's not
but isn't this exactly why policemen used to use rubber hoses and hit people with telephone books so it didn't leave a mark?
Yeah, but I just don't think you can just blanket whitewash everything and say you can't do anything that's stressful to a prisoner under any circumstances, no matter what, because that's not the reality of any battlefield.
We have a real expert on this subject, but I'm going to go to Masha first and just see what your thoughts are on this.
My thoughts are I can't even believe we're talking about this, to be honest.
Because it happens, that's why.
Yeah, I know, because it happens, but it seems so obvious to me that it shouldn't happen. And one of the reasons it shouldn't happen, and one of the reasons that I think that it's, the argument about whether or not torture is effective is actually spurious, is because when we allow the police or our intelligence services to do something, we allow them to do it to everybody. They're never going to do it just to the one person who we're convinced for some reason is evil and whose testimony is going to save innocent lives. They're going to do it to you and me eventually.
That's one of the great lessons of the old Soviet Union, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I live in a country where that happens. I know people who have been tortured. I have edited the diaries of a man who died in prison after being tortured.
Len Carl. You're the sort of expert on this subject. When it comes to torture, to pick up the question, do the ends justify the means ever?
No, they don't. We just heard, really, the world as described by Rupert Murdoch and the Republican Party of the United States, not a word of which makes sense and is related to the truth and the law and our heritage and effective interrogation. One, it doesn't work. There are 4 people who have written and spoken out about, quote, enhanced interrogation techniques since they occurred after 9/11. 2 Army officers who were interrogators, an FBI officer who was an interrogator, and a CIA officer who was one, myself. None of us knew each other. All of us say almost verbatim the same things, which is that it doesn't work, it is illegal, it is immoral, it is unnecessary. The only people who have spoken out in favor of, quote, enhanced interrogation techniques, the only ones, are one of two categories. Either the individuals who made the policies and are trying to defend them for their legacy and for legal defense reasons, or the shills for the policies themselves. They're the only ones. The person who wrote a book recently to which you alluded, arguing firsthand knowledge on the contrary, well, in fact, the book was ghostwritten by a former speechwriter for Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, whose expertise, ostensibly on interrogation, consists of having read a few telegrams while he was a speechwriter in the White House. So on practical grounds, it does not work. On moral grounds, it is wrong. On legal grounds, it is clear that it is illegal.
Well, let me ask you about your personal experience. Have you ever tortured anyone?
The enhanced interrogation techniques in which I was involved do cross the line of the obligations legally for the United States and any signatory of the Geneva Convention and of the Convention Against Torture.
So the answer to that is yes, in your opinion?
Yes.
What do those enhanced interrogation techniques include?
Well, there are two kinds that the CIA engaged in. The U.S. military is a different issue, but broadly the same, but two kinds. They are called standard and enhanced interrogation techniques, and they consist of physical or ostensibly psychological measures. And fundamentally, they are designed to, the term of art is psychologically dislocate the detainee. That means you make the person half crazy. And how do you do this? By playing upon our five senses. We see and perceive the world and have a sense of ourselves through our senses. Without that, we do not exist. There's no independent way, a priori, platonic way to have a sense of yourself in the world without your senses. So if you alter your sense of time, your diurnal rhythms, your sleep rhythms, the way you perceive
By doing
sound.
what? How do you do this?
Oh, you have sound at an almost deafening level nonstop, and the sounds are designed to create stress. So psychologists have shown, we all know, that the sound of an infant crying raises your blood pressure and your tension. It is distressing for a human being instinctively. So you hear babies wailing, and then you hear the mother saying, shrieking, "Don't do that to my child. Please stop." And then you hear the woman being beaten, and then you hear her falling, or you hear a gunshot, and you hear her being dragged away, or you hear car crashes and screams, you hear gunfire, and then you hear silence, and the silence is deafening and frightening because there's been nonstop sound. And then you don't let someone sleep for 17 hours, and they let them sleep for 8 minutes, and then you tell them that it was 8 hours, and you completely mess them up, and it's very quick. Very
can I
fast.
just ask you this? You've had someone brought into your presence to interrogate who's had all of these things done to them?
Yes.
How did that make you feel?
That's why I wrote the book. It's appalling. It's appalling.
I mean,
it's unnecessary.
It
does not work, and it's wrong.
Could you have said, I stand against this, I'm not going to talk to this man because of what you've done to him?
I could have, yes, and the book is an exploration of when to say no and how to say no and what to do so that you have some effect and you do something useful. And it is extremely difficult for an individual to challenge the weight of his entire government when you have been told explicitly, because I asked explicitly, is this legal? What are the effects? And I was told the President, the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, the Office of General Counsel of the White House, the Secretary of State, the Director of the CIA, all had formally considered, approved, authorized, and ordered this. And I, having been briefed on it for 3 minutes, was a lieutenant colonel.
Where was it
it's
happening,
very
by
difficult.
the way?
Well,
Was this, for
say
example,
where.
we're at war with the United States in Afghanistan. Was it happening there?
I am not allowed to say for legal reasons. I may not say, but there are enterprising and
You can't
competent
confirm
journalists,
or
some of them
deny
at The Guardian
the Afghanistan.
and the Australian, who can.
What would happen to you, for example, if you said now,
Well, I could
it
be
happened in
prosecuted.
Afghanistan, it happened in a prison outside of Kabul?
I may not confirm, deny, or comment on that. I may not. I can, but I may not.
Some
for
people who've
legal
written about your
reasons.
book said it happened near Rabat in Morocco.
I may not say.
Jeffrey?
Was it Trevor who asked the question?
Yes, the original one, yeah.
I think that the ends do not justify the means. And the problem with torture is once a society begins to condone it, and the citizens of that country begin to condone it, which is happening in the United States now, the moral fabric of the country becomes coarse, and you might save some lives from it, but you end up not having a country worth saving in the first place.
And you don't save lives from it. It doesn't work. The ticking
it would
time
work on
bomb,
me for sure.
The ticking time bomb scenario.
I mean, I would give it up very quickly.
But we don't care about writers.
Surely Abu Ghraib, when you see those photos, they become recruitment posters for Al Qaeda.
Were there Abu Ghraibs in other countries? Just to make that point.
I guess the one-word answer to that is no. There were a number of black sites, is the term, secret interrogation facilities in other countries, yes. The techniques that we all were horrified by that occurred at Abu Ghraib, I'm confident did not occur anywhere else. That's why I started my remarks by making a distinction between the CIA and the military. The practices were radically different. And the CIA never did enough wrong, but never did anything remotely like what we saw at Abu Ghraib.
All right, let's move on to another subject. You're watching Q&A. If you'd like to